All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening, and happy National Coaches Week to all coaches and panelists on here tonight. We're excited to have our second panel of the week regarding perseverance and Canada Games experiences. So we have three coaches with us tonight that I will introduce shortly after our land acknowledgement. And before we get into land acknowledgement, I will introduce myself as well. My name is Kirsty. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the community coaching lead at CSI Atlantic. On behalf of CSI Atlantic, I would like to acknowledge that we are located in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship. We are aware that there are participants online joining from all over Turtle Island and welcome each of you to share where you currently reside by inserting that in the chat box. We honor Mi'kmaq people who have taken care of this land, and at CSI Atlantic, we show respect for this land and work to make sure we keep taking care of it for all of us. We are all treaty people. And now I'd like to introduce our first panelist. So we have a panelist from each province in the Atlantic provinces or in the Atlantic region, and they all represent different sports. So we're going to introduce each of them, and then they'll share a highlight from their Canada Games experience. So first, I'd like to introduce Bailey Andrews. She's originally from Charlottetown, PEI, and moved to New Brunswick in 2015 after high school to attend St. Thomas University, where she obtained a double major degree in human rights and criminology with a double minor in forensic anthropology and math. She then attended the University of New Brunswick, where she played one more season of rugby, and after graduating, Bailey joined Rugby New Brunswick as the Rugby Development Officer. She has had the opportunity to work with a number of teams, which include middle school, high school, university, club, and provincial teams on both the men's and women's side. Most recently, Bailey joined Team New Brunswick at the 2022 Niagara Games as an apprentice coach with the women's rugby team. So now I'd like to hand it over to Bailey to add more to her bio or share an experience from the Canada Games with us.
All right, not much more to add on the bio side, but I would say that there were a lot of highlights being able to attend the Canada Games, especially as an apprentice coach. So there was lots of learning, not just for the players, but for myself as well. But one of the highlights would probably be playing in our very first game. We were down and were able to come back in the second half, having the lead in the last minute. Unfortunately, the game didn't end in our favor, but it was really something special to watch the girls play and see them realize that they weren't just there as a small province, but they were there to compete. So that was something really, really awesome to see.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing, Bailey. I'm sure that was special for them too, and having rugby back at the games. Next, I'll introduce Richard. So Richard Christopher is Newfoundland and Labrador Canada Games men's indoor volleyball head coach. Richard is a physical education teacher and athletic director at St. Peter's Junior High in Mount Pearl. He has been teaching there for 10 years. He was named the Newfoundland and Labrador Volleyball Association Senior High Coach of the Year this past June, and was also named the Junior High Coach of the Year in 2019. In 2020, Richard was awarded the Physical and Health Education Canada National Award for Teaching Excellence in Physical Education. He always volunteers and gives back to his community. He was named the City of Mount Pearl Dave Holloway Award for Adult Volunteer Working with Youth in Sport, as well as the NLVA Darryl Pye Community Development Award for growing the sport of volleyball in Mount Pearl. Richard was also the recipient of the PHE Canada Dr. Andy Anderson Young Professional Award. Throughout the years, Richard has coached many different school sports, including volleyball, soccer, softball, track and field, baseball, and cross-country running. He coached the O'Donnell High School male volleyball team, which won 4A provincial title last year during an undefeated season, as well as the Pythons Volleyball Club, which won the 2022 National Division II Tier 1 Male Championship. This was the highest a Newfoundland volleyball coach This was the highest a volleyball team has ever finished at a national event from Newfoundland. At the Volleyball Canada Nationals, Richard was named Coach of the Wave. He also coached the NLVA U15 male provincial volleyball team to a Tier 1 Eastern Elite Championship in 2019. Richard is a guest speaker for coaching and physical activity. He loves to promote physical education and activity in Newfoundland and is a major promoter of multi-sport athletes. So thank you so much, Richard, for joining us tonight. And if you'd like to share a memory from the past games, please unmute and share with us all.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I think there's so many takeaways from the Canada Games, so many awesome moments. Two that stick out to me the most. One on the coaching side was getting to see my athletes interact with other athletes from different sports. So they got to get an appreciation for different types of sports, see different sports, have those conversations with different athletes. And we always talk about the word multi-sport athlete, and now they really got a really good appreciation for that. So that was one really cool takeaway. And the other on a team side, in Newfoundland, for Newfoundland volleyball over the last 20 years, a team has never made the quarterfinals. So our team was able to defeat a number of really strong teams and get to the quarterfinals this year at the Canada Games. And we got to play that game in front of our premier, Andrew Fury. So that was a really special event and special moment for our group.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing, Richard. And next, I'll introduce Nova Scotia's representative. So Jared Griffith is a National B licensed and NCCP Comp Dev certified coach from Nova Scotia. He has been coaching for 15 years, spent 10 of those years with the Soccer Nova Scotia provincial program and 5 years with the Regional Excel program for Soccer Canada. During this time, Jared has led teams to 3 provincial titles, 5 Atlantic championships, 1 national bronze medal at National Club Championships, and most recently, a bronze medal at the 2022 Canada Games in Niagara. Outside of coaching, Jared is an elementary school principal, husband to his wife, who is also a teacher, and father to 2 young boys. So Jared, I'll let you share your favorite memory from the game.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me, and thanks for those that are joining on a night to hear a little bit more about all that happened at the games. A simple one for me, and the easy answer is kind of, winning a bronze medal was our highlight. We had spent, the group had spent the better part of 3 years training with everything, trying to get there. But really the real highlight was seeing the performances when we got there. We had put a ton into it to really be able to go, and we talked a lot about being ourselves when we got there, no matter who we had to play against, whether that be Ontario, who we played in the semifinals, or Alberta, who we had in the bronze medal. We wanted to play like we could, like we did, and to have really what was our best performance as a team all the way through our program in our final game in the bronze medal game was really the highlight. Kind of win or lose out of that at that point, it obviously it would matter, but what was put into it to have a performance like that when it mattered the most was really something special and neat to watch. And to get rewarded with a goal finally a little late in the game was really exciting. And obviously, it's nice to take home a medal for, I think, only the 3rd time in 30-some years for women's soccer at the games. So, and be the only female team from Nova Scotia to bring home a medal was pretty exciting for us.
Yeah, that's a great memory, and I was happy to be able to watch it and see you guys win. So yeah, thank you for sharing, and thank you for being here tonight, Jared. And last but not least, Mike Connelly. So Mike has been coaching for 35 years and has an extensive resume that includes 7 Canada Games, 1985 for rugby and 1987 for basketball as an athlete. Twice as PEI mission staff from 2019 and 2013. 2009 cycling manager, 2017 road coach, and 2022 for the mountain bike and road coach cycling. Having invested heavily in the NCCP system with training and certification in 7 different sports: hockey, basketball, wrestling, baseball, soccer, cycling, and triathlon. He actively coaches soccer, triathlon, hockey, and cycling. He's involved in coaching school sport at the middle school and high school level for soccer, basketball, and cross-country running. So I'd like to welcome back Mike, because he was part of our panel yesterday, and we're excited to have him back again tonight. So Mike, if you'd like to share your favorite memory from the Canada Summer Games with us.
Thanks, Chrissy. I told my shoe story last time, so I'll share a different memory this time around. It was really nice for Cycling Canada to send Tanya Dubnikoff down to the Canada Games to as the performance coach to touch base with all the cycling coaches first week to see what the state of cycling was in Canada, and got feedback from all the provinces, which was nice. That's important because a lot of the smaller provinces don't have a voice at times, and it was very nice for Tanya to come in and showed a lot of interest, 3-time Olympian, and it was just cool to meet her and hear her aspects of high performance sport compared to what we have here in the Atlantic provinces and the Prairie provinces, which are the smaller provinces. So we're not that far off. We do have some, a long way to go in cycling, but it's great now that some of the NSOs are getting into the smaller provinces and showing interest for athletes and teams. And there's a lot of jewels in the rough in the Atlantic provinces, and we've shown that with the number of athletes that we have on national teams. Bailey, you would know our Miss Rugby representative from UPEI on the national team that's now at the World Cup. So it was great to see that, and that was a highlight for a lot of coaches. I think that Tanya came down and spent the time with the coaches, and she actually showed up to the competition the next day to go and talk to some of the kids and make herself available. So that was pretty cool, and that was great of Cycling Canada to send her down.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing, Mike. And for those that didn't hear his story yesterday about the shoe story, definitely go and watch the recording. And Mike has lots of Canada Games experience, so definitely tune into both of the sessions. So for the first question, we'll start back at the top. So we'll start with Bailey. So due to COVID-19, the Canada Summer Games were postponed by a year. How did you adapt your plan and keep your athletes motivated?
It was definitely a challenge and a learning curve, since we didn't have a team selected. It was more of just kind of keeping rugby alive in the province and keeping kids as engaged as we could. However, an added barrier we sort of had with rugby was, as a whole, a lot of the provinces agreed that we were going to kind of push the age group. So originally it still is a U18 tournament, but we were allowed to have some overagers. So those who were missing out on the year, since the year kind of was pushed back, we were allowed to keep 5 of those players if we chose to. So that added a bit of an extra barrier, seeing that they were off to university and most left the province. So it was really hard to kind of keep those athletes engaged out of province. In province, we had our winter academy running, as well as like a independent sevens program. So there were players involved playing rugby, but definitely was a learning curve, because as well as the athletes were disappointed, coaches were also disappointed. So at times it was difficult to try and kind of figure out what we were doing or why we were doing it, since things kind of at points kept seeming like they were going to be pushed back and pushed back. But we were able to keep some engagement through social media, as well as, like I said, our programs that we ran. We had an independent sevens program that ran, and we were able to get to 3 different tournaments, which kind of brought the excitement and the word of rugby sevens to those playing and also those around. So when we had tryouts in the spring for our Canada Games program, there was some excitement around it, and we did the best we could. It was always a learning curve, so hopefully we don't have to deal with it again. But if we do, we have a couple tricks up our sleeves.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Bailey. And Richard, I'll throw it over to you next. So due to the postponement, how did you adapt your plan and keep your athletes motivated?
Yeah, I guess with the pandemic, when the case count was so high, it was so hard for not just Canada Games athletes, but students, people with jobs. Like, it was so difficult to keep people motivated. And the biggest thing, I guess, what we did was, as a coaching staff, was try to stay connected with our athletes. So we wanted to stay connected, keep the communication open, so that their personal goals, their fitness goals, their volleyball goals, we were always here if they needed us, kind of thing. So a couple of things that we did, our PSO had a strength and conditioning coach online. So we pivoted to online learning, and they could do their strength and conditioning through the online platform. When the case count got a little bit lower and we were able to regroup and have some group sessions, we brought our mission staff into our sessions. So we had a really great mission staff. Our chef de mission was Gary Martin, and Tom Godden and Jamie Randall. They all came into our sessions, and they just talked to our athletes, and they just talked to them about what to expect at the Canada Games, like the clothing, the different athletes, different events, the pin trading, and just shared some experiences with them to get them excited. And then when our training sessions were starting again, we brought in Canada Games alumni. So we brought in like 4 generations of Canada Games athletes. Sometimes they would play against us. Sometimes they'd train with us. These guys were like, say, some of them were 22 years old, 28, 26, right up to like 32, but they all had like their Canada Games jerseys, and they all shared stories with the athletes, and that really built some excitement, because postponing the games by a year was such a stretch for these athletes. And then the other part was for volleyball, the age group got changed to U19. So our Canada Games team had 9 high school players and 3 post-secondary players. So, and there's no men's university team in Newfoundland. So what we would do is I would send out university matches from across Canada of 19-year-olds that I knew were on the junior national team that we were going to play. So by the time we got to the Canada Games, our athletes knew who these guys were. They could talk to them by first name. They got to play these guys. And then not only did they get to play them, they got to meet them after the match. They got to have some conversations. Some became friends. And it was just a big learning experience. And they got to talk to these guys about how do you get to that level, or how do you play post-secondary volleyball. So we used as much of the community as possible, and as much other people to bring in and share experiences to get our athletes motivated, and luckily that worked, and we had a bunch of excited athletes come to the Canada Games, and they trained really hard.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I love the use of your mission staff and bringing in former athletes. It definitely, provides a picture and more like a tangible why or purpose for those athletes, so they can see what they're going to be like, after the games are over. So that's awesome to give that to your athletes. Jared, we'll throw it over to you next. How did you adapt your plan and keep your athletes motivated?
It's almost like nightmares thinking back of all the different times. So myself and our coaching staff, pretty big planners in terms of long-term. It comes with my job territory. So when we started the program in 2019 is when we were kind of handed the Canada Games team, and we had what we thought was 2 years. So we had laid out a 2-year plan of, this is when we want to do this. This is when we make selections by the whole thing. And then, obviously, just like everybody else's program, it got thrown a bit in the meat grinder, and all right, what can you do with it? So we made the decision early on in the pandemic. We had between 40 and 45 athletes still in our program in March of 2022 or March of 2020. And we decided, at least initially, we weren't going to cut anybody. So they had enough going on. They didn't need to get cut from Canada Games at that point as well. So we ended up keeping a group of 40 to 45 for the better part of 7 months until about November of 2020 before we made any more releases. Normally, we would have, kind of brought our team down a lot more than that. But we talked a lot and built a lot around a culture of kind of we before me. So really building around that philosophy that we're all in this together. We're all working kind of towards one goal. Some of them are obviously going to go to Canada Games. Some of them are not. But, as a province, we're trying to be the very best that we can be. And if we do that, each individual player is going to be better and have more success within the program in terms of Soccer Nova Scotia. So if they get released, they still set themselves up to be, a university level player. So we did a lot of that in terms of trying to keep players motivated. We tried a little bit of the Zoom stuff. The players were like, go away. We're tired of this. Like, they knew they could check in with us, but, we tried a couple of Zoom fitness sessions. They're like, no, not for us. We don't want to do that. So we were lucky, and obviously there was chunks of time where we were off, we were away from the field, but we were able to get on the field. At least we were in groups of 10 a lot, which is, trying to coach that for soccer was, you would talk about nightmares. Trying to do that again is not a lot of fun with high level athletes. But it did create a sense around the players that they knew what they were missing when the game was taken from them. So the opportunity to be on the field for them became more and more important when they were allowed back on it. So in a lot of ways, I found it became easier to motivate athletes when they were allowed back on the field, because they knew what they had missed during the time that they're away from it. So I think, not that the pandemic has given us a lot of great things, but that was one sort of for our players. We really found that the motivation and the love of the game was there. So they were less likely to complain if we had, we trained at 6 a.m. twice a week. They really didn't mind that, because they knew that was better than the alternative, not being able to get on the field when they went through. So, we really put a kind of a player first mentality, and really kind of keeping their mental health in the forefront as the early parts of the pandemic. And then as it moved on, selections had to be made and decisions had to be made. But we spent a lot of time trying to keep the group as big as we could to keep them involved.
That's great. Thanks, Jared. And I love the we before me and the athlete first. And I think that's so great for the development of the sport. And I think too, if the athletes are looking forward to getting back to sport, it speaks to your guys' coaching as well. So thank you for sharing that. And Mike, we'll pass over to you. How did you keep your athletes motivated after the postponement?
So we try to keep them focused as much as we could on the process, which is not always easy. So try to keep them focused on the training. And, a lot of times they questions like, why are we doing this? We don't know if we're going, and it's not fun. Can't see each other. So one simple thing that kind of brought people around was we got new kit. And it did the trick. I can't explain it. So we had, I'm going to backtrack a bit here. So the high performance committee was developing new kit for the high performance team, which some of these kids were on both. And we said, we're going to jump in on that. It gave them a focus. Unbelievable. It just gave them something to look forward to, something that was like that they were going to have no matter what. And that seemed to do the trick. It's the smallest things like that. It's hard to believe. So when we did end up going to national championships for mountain bike and the Canada Games, we were very proudly wearing their high performance and their Canada Games kit. So that, that was I'll have to say that's a factor, even though it was a small thing and it kept people on track. The other thing that we did when they did start to question the training was like, well, why are we doing this? So I think someone mentioned it. I think Jarrett mentioned it. The goal setting. The goal setting was invaluable, because, okay, here we don't want, no, why we're doing this. So what are the goals? So we set 3 team goals, although cycling is a team sport. Most people don't think it is, because there is a team relay now and there are team points for flag points. So we set 3 team goals and we set 3 individual goals, and then we reviewed the individual goals with each individual person, and that kept them going forward. And again, attainable, measurable, realistic goals. And again, that seemed to do the trick for the short term till we got back out on the bikes when kind of COVID passed. So yeah, the kit, I just don't know, the kit seemed to do the trick. So I thought I'd throw that in there. So that was my ace in the hole.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, the goal setting for sure. And I know I'm prepping for the Winter Games right now, and we haven't named our final roster yet, but every time we get a new piece of clothing for the team, it motivates them. It really does. So I'll back you up with that one for sure. All right, let's go the reverse order this time. So Mike, you can start for the next question. What was the biggest challenge you faced at the Canada Summer Games, and how did you overcome it?
So I'll pick a different one than I did last night. So really my biggest overall challenge was female recruitment. We only had one female attend the games. She attended both weeks. She attended week 1 for mountain and week 2 for road. So we figured out she was the only female that competed for Prince Edward Island since 2001. So our female numbers have been absolutely dismal, and we've only had a handful of women compete at the Canada Games. I think there was a couple in 77, and they're very sporadic. Maybe I think it was two. I think there was one in 2005. So I think it was 2005 or 2001. So Women recruitment, I think across Canada and all the other sports is relevant, but more so in cycling. We don't have the female numbers that we can field the full team. We get 4 on the road and 3 on the mountain. And so we're leaving 5 spots for potential athletes unfilled, which is very unfortunate because I know there's people out there. Cycling PEI did a great job of building up their women's numbers through a women's only program, but they were all rec numbers and they were mostly older adults. So I know there's a program a few years ago trying to get membership 50-50. So Cycling PEI did achieve that through the women's only road and mountain bike programs, but there's no females racing, very few. There's like 5 or 6 people on Prince Edward Island that are racing. They're very good, but they're older. And we just don't have the uptake for the kids to want to come off the mountain bike and get on the road, especially to compete. So how did I overcome that? We went out and we recruited from other sports. Again, we didn't have a whole lot of uptake. We had a nice kid that her brother competed with me back in 2017, and she was coming in as a minimum major at 16. And she competed both weeks. Lily Nicholson's beautiful kid. It was great. So really kind of got her in the fold. And the big thing with the females, she didn't really want to come at first because there was no other females. So it is really a social thing. It is really, she's there as the only female. So when we went to the mountain bike nationals, I know I'm dropping all the big names tonight. Catherine Pendrell, I introduced her to Catherine Pendrell, and Catherine said, I was the only female for years and years and years. You can do it. So that gave her a bump, and we got her to the games, and she did wonderful. And now she's eligible for 2025 in Newfoundland. And the majors, the media outlets on PEI picked that up, and they ran some stories with it. So now she is the voice. And she is going out to the other girls saying, hey, we can do it. So we're using her to recruit, and she's trying to spread the word for us for female sports.
That's awesome. And I hope she does recruit a few more, and that'd be great to see the sport grow for females. Thanks for sharing. And Jared, I'll have you go next. What was the biggest challenge and how did you overcome it?
The biggest challenge for us is one we kind of knew going in is playing time. Canada Games has its own set of substitution rules for soccer that is not the same as any other youth tournament that they play. So they can substitute twice at halftime and 5 during play and no re-entry. So with 18 players, 11 on the field, if you make all your subs and somebody gets hurt, you've got nobody left to put in and you're not allowed to. So trying to balance that out over 4 games in what was 8 days for us and trying to, manage expectations, we knew would be difficult. We, worked with Cindy Ty, who had been there for the last 3 games as the women's coach, in knowing that would be an issue, knowing that would be a large part of the conversation when we were there with athletes. We spent a lot of time prepping them beforehand, explaining it, and then talking about it. And then as we're getting closer, working with players individually, like, this is where we see your role. This is where we can see, you having an impact. And we talked a lot about with the players that everybody's not going to play the same amount of minutes. It's not going to happen. But everybody's going to have a moment that they're going to be really important to the group. And that may be 15, 20 minutes here. It may be 15, 20 minutes there. It may be we get up late. We need you to go on and we need you to help defend. And there was a number of cases of that for us in our bronze medal game. We scored, we made a defensive substitution to add another one of a defender on who, really good defensively, really sound defensively. We made a substitution late in the game as our striker literally ran out of legs and couldn't run anymore. We put somebody up front who really isn't, that isn't her traditional role. Just wanted her to go out and work and make life difficult for the other team for 10 minutes. And, there were still some interesting conversations with players throughout the games around it. And obviously typical things you would expect, upset around it, players wanting to play more at different times than they maybe did. Maybe early in the tournament, they didn't play, didn't recognize that later in the tournament, they'd have a moment or a bit of time for us. So it was it's a really interesting part of a team sport where we weren't free to rotate whenever we wanted, which is traditionally in youth soccer. They've grown up being able to sub freely. They all played big minutes with their club teams, their provincial program. It's usually at least 50-50 play time. So it's a really unique experience, similar to the university game for those that are going on to play at that level, but really something new for them. So we knew it would be a challenge, and we really spent a lot of time prepping them. Was it perfect? Absolutely not, but did it go about as well as we expected and hoped it would for sure. But it really is something as a team sport that we knew we'd have to spend a lot of time, energy, and effort on.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing, Jared. And yeah, I'm sure that would be a big adjustment for them and for you as well. So thanks. And Richard, we'll have you go next.
I think for mine, and it probably will be similar for many team sports, was the amount of downtime between matches. So like I said, like we had 9 out of 12 high school students, so they're used to playing volleyball matches. A tournament might be, say, 5 matches on a Friday and Saturday, 2 out of 3 sets. And then the Canada Games was a 3 out of 5 set match, 1 a day. So that leaves lots and lots of downtime. So our game plan going into that was to schedule a structured day, just like we did training at home. So we had a really great team nutritionist, and she set up our meal plan. So when we would eat and when we would eat our snacks. So that would be one portion of our day. Our mental performance coach did a lot of great work with us with visualization, positive self-talk, and we had a pregame routine built in there as well. So that was another part of our day. We were able to book out a classroom that was on campus, and we could do some video sessions there where we could do some analysis of our games. There was also opportunity to book out a court for practice. So we booked out this practice court, but we used it with back home. Our strength and conditioning coach did a lot of mobility work, injury prevention work. So we booked out that court, and then we'd spend 30 or 45 minutes there. We'd also schedule in an activity once during the week to go see another sport. And basically we just kept ourselves very busy and very structured, but then we also allowed some free time for the athletes as well to go and mingle with the other athletes from our province and from different provinces. But we tried to keep it very structured. So the athletes had some downtime, but it wasn't just one full day of downtime. So I think that was our biggest challenge going in, was what we were going to do with our day. And that was the plan we came up with.
Thanks for sharing, and it sounds like you utilized your IFT team really well, so that's great. And yeah, thank you, Richard. And Bailey, I'll let you wrap up this question. So what was the biggest challenge you faced, and how did you overcome it?
Sorry. There was a lot of like little things that would come up. Like one thing going into the games, we were only allowed to bring 10 athletes for a full contact sevens tournament, so 3 subs. If any injuries occurred, it just wasn't the best setup, and a lot of different coaches flagged that going in. But that was something we didn't luckily have to worry about, but that was flagged as soon as our games were done. It was, you're right, for the next games that will be adjusted. So that was something going in that people weren't the happiest with, but that kind of ironed itself out. But I'd say one of the biggest thing for competition was a lot of our athletes, I don't think expected to perform as well as we might have done at a national event due to COVID. This might have been a handful of their first taste at this. So being a smaller province going up against some of the bigger ones, there was some disappointment, like, oh, we lost against Ontario, but they hadn't experienced playing a bigger province like that before. So we worked with some of our mission staff. So Renee was one of our mental performance coaches that a lot of the girls had dealt with in our other rugby programs in the province. So it was really nice to have her. So we did a lot of like visualization, goal setting, like has been mentioned by others. But like that was one of our biggest kind of challenges, was trying to get the girls to realize that they were doing so well. we might not have always gotten the result that we wanted, but the announcers, people in the crowd were singing their praise that this little group from New Brunswick was making a splash, and it was hard for them to see it, being for most their first major tournament on a national stage. So it was a lot of like little events outside, like let's everyone write down their biggest fears and we're going to throw them over our shoulder into a garbage bag. Or we did, our coach called them heck yeah high fives. So every girl got 2 names of different athletes, and it was write something nice, and then they're handed out so that you were given kind of a confidence boost. So that was super beneficial, being able to rely on our mental performance coach and let the girls kind of talk together and work through any maybe doubts they had, and realize that like they were all there for a reason, and everything that they were doing was positive, and showing them that we had all this support from home and people were super impressed with them. So that was kind of how we dealt with that through our competition.
Thanks for sharing that, Bailey. And it is something that I think we face a lot as small provinces, is we often look at the score, and when people ask us how we're doing, it's, you know, it's the wins and the losses, but it is important to reflect on how you're competing, especially against a province that has probably 10 times the size of an athlete pool as you do. So I think that's great, and how you guys handled it as coaches sounds like fun and a good culture in general. So thank you for sharing that. For the next question, I'll rotate as much as I can. So I'll start with Richard this time. And this will be our last question. So for coaches that are participating, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat box now and we can ask it after. But our last question is, what is one piece of advice you would like to provide to help other coaches best prepare themselves and their athletes for major events such as the Canada Summer Games? So Richard, you first.
Yeah, I think with this one, like there's a saying, like it takes a village, and as a coach, like you really got to focus on that when you're going into the Canada Games. Like one of our team's slogans was, we were going to be good at controlling things that were in our power to control. So control what you can control. So for us, like we had a really good support team. So our mental performance coach, our team nutritionist, our strength and conditioning coach. Then we talked about the alumni, the Canada Games alumni, bringing them in and having them talk to our athletes and play with our athletes. Former Canada Games coaches, touching base with them, and bringing in the community and having the community support you. So a lot of times when we did take on these alumni in matches, getting ready, we would invite the younger provincial kids to come out and watch our match, because they were the next generation of Canada Games athletes. So we wanted to motivate them as well, kind of thing. And we used to invite in other coaches from around the province to come into our practice sessions, come in and have some conversations, and try to leave it better than what you inherited. Like every coach should do that every time. And in Newfoundland, we do a really good job of coaches before leaving a good framework for the next coach that comes in. So I think that when you get involved in this, like you really got to look at a team aspect as a coach and get a really good support system, and have your athletes be role models for other people in the community as well, and have your community want to support your Canada Games team and want to be involved in the Canada Games team. But I think reaching out and making sure your sport community is involved, the president of your organization, your PSO, have everyone involved and everyone on board, and that makes it the team understands the sport, then the parents understand their sport. But that's one thing I would definitely suggest is it takes a village to make sure you get the support, and you look out for the next group that's coming after you.
That's a great message. Thank you, Richard. I think it's awesome that you guys incorporated your whole community, not just like the high performance Canada Games environment, but also the next generation. That's wonderful. So thank you. And Bailey, we'll have you go next. So piece of advice for coaches to prepare themselves and their athletes.
I'd say keep it fun. I know one of the biggest things with our athletes were they played better when they were having fun, when they weren't worried about the pressure, the what ifs, the this and the that. So always trying to incorporate fun into what you're doing. Maybe it's a silly little warm-up game. Like we would play hot dog tag before we started to get into our warm-up, just something loose to get the athletes moving around and working on skills that they're not really thinking about because it's a silly little tag game. So that was something that I like to bring to teams, and something that I think the athletes really needed. They needed just a second to take a breath and not think about even the competition. It was just having fun. So I would say for coaches to kind of think of those things and be prepared. I know we ran into an issue. We were at the games. We were like, oh, like we're going to do a little activation thing. And we're like, oh, did anyone bring this? And we didn't have it. So like we made do with what we had around, but just kind of, again, the first games rugby sevens was involved in. So there was lots of learning on our end as well as the athletes. But yeah, I'd say remember to have fun, bring the fun, and encourage the athletes to have fun with what they're doing and enjoy the whole experience.
That's great. Thanks, Bailey. And I think that applies to coaches too, because I think, you're there for, 7 to 10 days sometimes, and you're just tense the whole time. So it's important to have fun and enjoy it. Mike, we'll throw it over to you.
So I'd like to talk about the dreaded C word, certification. I'd just like to touch on that. And my advice to coaches is embrace the NCCP system. A lot of coaches see it as a barrier. It's difficult, it's long, it's hard, there's testing, and I know my 3 colleagues here, Richard, Jared, Bailey, have gone through that, and they know what I'm talking about, as well as all the other Canada Games coaches. It can be very prohibitive if you have family or time commitments. It's a time consuming thing, but I suggest to coaches, please embrace it. It's a worthwhile endeavor, and to use it. Like a lot of people take it and then they just coach the way they used to coach. Probably me being one back in when I took some courses, you didn't really use it, but then there's a lot of value in the NCCP system. If you delve into it, study it, look at it, take the courses seriously, it will benefit you as a coach, and your athletes will have a better experience because you are more educated through the courses that you take through your comp dev, your level 3 training. And I think it's invaluable that we have this system. And, I talk to a lot of coaches and they're like, God, coach, but I don't want to take my level 3. So my key point is embrace it, learn from it. It'll make you a terrific coach, and you'll have a fantastic Canada Games experience, and your kids will thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I'm happy I'm not the one that has to preach that tonight. So that's great. And just from like a Nova Scotia side, like for any coaches listening, maybe you are thinking about becoming a Canada Games coach eventually, or some sort of other high performance coach. All of our comp dev multi-sport are being offered for free right now online. So definitely take advantage of that. I know a lot of coaches, that's how they got their certification in time for Niagara and for PEI for February 2023. So if you're even thinking about a little bit about it, do it now, because usually it would cost you hundreds of dollars. So yeah. All right. So I'm messing up my lap. Jared, okay. You're next.
Yeah. So I kind of have 2 things, and they kind of piggyback off of some of the things that were said. For me, one of the big things is enjoy the journey. We talked a lot with our athletes about this is a process. This is a long road. Most of them just see the end goal in mind. All they're worried about is I got to make Canada Games, and I got to go, and I got to be really good when I get there. So we talked at length with them through the process of, enjoy the different moments. So we had a lot of camps where we bring them together for weekend Atlantic championships, different things like that. A lot of training, 100 and some sessions over the program with the athletes. And we talked a lot about, live in the moment that you're in, whatever that happens to be. Stop worrying so much about what's 3 months ahead of the time. And one of the first things we did when we got to Canada Games is using one of the team rooms. We sat there and we talked probably an hour and a half conversation with the players about what was your favorite moment leading up to the games. So we're here now, but what was the thing you've enjoyed most in the last 3 years? And the answers were really interesting. They ranged. We happened to go to New York for a tournament, so a lot of them, that was a big thing for them. You know, they got to go to New York, they got all that. We were in Manhattan, the whole thing. But there's a lot of them that was these funny little things that we did. You know, whether playing soccer, tennis somewhere, at one of the camps that we were at, wasting time. All these little things that you really don't even think of as a coach as being a big deal. It's just as, you know, trying to fill some time. But those are the moments that the athletes really remembered. And we talked a lot at the games of, you know, those moments don't go anywhere. So no matter what happens, whatever result we had, you know, whatever way it shook out, all of these moments, all these memories are still there. And the athletes really appreciated that when they were able to take a step back and think about it, that they have all of these things that aren't going anywhere. So it was nice to have. And then for us, the biggest thing I think that led to our success as a team is we set our culture very, very early in our program of what was acceptable and what was not. And we held them to that standard, sometimes right to the razor thin edge of maybe we're pushing them a little too hard. I remember one of our athletes coming in about a month and a half before games, and she had this look on her face, and we had a conversation. She was like, we're close to the edge here. It might be too much. So they're great recognition for us to back off a little bit, but we really set our standards with them, and this is what's going to be acceptable and this is what's not. And it wasn't a results-based thing. It was, this is how we're going to develop. This is how we're going to improve. And this is what you need to do to put yourself in the situation to do that. And then with that, within our culture, we created a leadership group after we had selected our team. So players voted. We had final say as coaching staff, but really the players who they voted for were the 4 people we picked. And we put a lot of trust in them to be the go-between how the team was feeling and what we needed to do. So great example of that, about 3 weeks before the games, we had an exhibition match set up against a U15 boys team. And we were coming off a couple games that we had been very, very good. And in my opinion, we needed to lose. We hadn't lost, the group hadn't lost in the better part of 6 months. I'm like, we need to get our butts kicked, basically. And the players, our leadership group was like, we don't want to play the boys. We have no interest in playing the boys team. The game is so different. They're like, we don't think it's going to help us. We're like, okay, you know, coaching staff is like, I don't know if this is a great decision or not, but we decided we're going to put our trust in them, right, and listen to their opinion. And it worked out. We ended up losing our next league game, which was great for us. We needed a loss, and then they kind of helped them that way. But it was an important message for them to know that if they had concerns or they didn't like something as players, they could bring it to us and we would trust them. So kind of filling out our culture piece was the ability to listen to them. And you know, we're working with 17, 18-year-olds that are about to go off to university. So you can put your trust in them. I know some of the coaches, depending on what age group you're working with, sometimes that's a little harder to build a group that way. But really it was a huge part for us is that players understood that within our culture, they had a voice, and, you know, we would listen to them. They didn't always get their way, but of course we listened to them. They were validated, and we would hear what they were saying. So all built together in that culture piece was a huge, huge part for us. And we use the slogan, "We before me." I have no idea where I stole that from. I didn't come up with it. I read it in something. And it's funny, one of these things when you're trying to build a team culture. We talked about this and referenced it a number of times. And sometimes you look at the players and they're like, do they even like this? Are they even really paying attention? And then after we won a medal, a few of them did, you know, based on where they're from, did, you know, media interviews, things like that. And a lot of them referenced the culture and how connected they were because of the things that we talked about and referenced "we before me." So really giving them something as an anchor point, I think, is really critical, especially if your program is something that it's a little bit more long-term. So for soccer, it generally starts 2 years out from the game. So we spend a lot of time around these kids. So it really helped us have an anchor point for them. So it's something I would highly recommend if you're going to have a lot of time with your athletes, that whatever your standards are, your culture is, set it and do everything you can to maintain it. And that's not always easy, but the players in the end will really respect it, you know, bond your group, and the results will go the way they do. There's not much you can do at, you know, at that Canada Games level, but it will create them, you know, a lot of memories that they will go away with at the end of the day, win or lose.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jared. That's a great message to wrap up our main questions with. And it looks like Richard has a question about that. Do you? Yeah.
No, it just sparked something. Is it okay if I had one last thing? Just to that point, one thing I'd like coaches to keep in mind as well going forward is just being creative, and don't let limitations stick. Sometimes within Atlantic Canada, like we have challenges of competitions or travel or things like that. One thing that our coaching staff did this cycle that I'd love to pass on to other coaches was we actually used some of our funding to bring in an athlete. We brought in a junior national athlete to our training camp. So instead of us traveling to them, we brought this athlete into us, and it was an awesome experience. Our players got to practice with this athlete. Like I was saying before, like we had 9 out of 12 high school players. We don't have a university program here in Newfoundland. So bringing that player in, I remember I always show up probably like 45 minutes before my athletes show up, kind of thing. And the very first practice, this junior national athlete, he was there. He started his stretching process. The guys came into the gym. They come in early too. They seen him there doing his stretching, getting prepared, kind of thing. They got to ask him questions. They got to train with them. And a very special moment when the Friday evening session, myself and the other coaches were there cleaning up the gym, and people were leaving. And this junior national athlete, he started going around the gym, and he was up on the stage, and he was picking up the recyclables, and the athletes were looking at him, and he just said, like, thank you so much for this opportunity. And he did things the right way, kind of thing, right? And that really showed a good message to those athletes, because at the junior national level or national level, to get there, you need not only to be a talented athlete, but you had to be a good person as well. So we talk about building culture, like Jared talked about. That helps so much for our culture of our program. And we were able to bring other athletes from across Newfoundland in to see this athlete and just see what it takes to build and to get to that level. So be creative sometimes with your planning. It doesn't always have to be a tournament somewhere. You can also bring somebody in, and that can change the whole culture of your program.
Yeah, that's a great message too. Thank you, Richard. And yeah, great advice for the coaches. Do we have any questions from the coaches that are in the audience or as participants? Or any last words from our panelists? All right, it looks like we don't. So I'd like to thank the panelists so much for joining us this evening and sharing your wisdom with us and your experiences and your perseverance for having the postponement of the games. I know and I'm sure everyone in the audience really appreciates it. And thank you all for these lessons. And as someone attending the Winter Games in like less than 6 months, this makes me really excited. So thank you so much for sharing with us. In terms of what's next for coaches to get more PD and learn from others, as mentioned yesterday, we have an interesting and unique opportunity coming up. So we've heard from some coaches that are coaching majority masters athletes, and they're looking for more PD specific to their age group. So we have Bettina and Bradley, who do extensive research around coaching masters athletes, who are going to be presenting a webinar on September 27th and again on November 22nd. And it's going to be more of a workshop in the sense that it'll be more interactive and lots of networking with coaches. So feel free to join that. It's on the locker calendar under Nova Scotia's calendar. So look for that, completely free, and anyone is welcome to join us. Our next Podium Performance webinar series is October 18th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. with Lori and Scott, and they'll be discussing mentorship and what we know about it. So they've done some research, learning from multiple organizations across the country and teaching us what we can do and how we can be better mentors and mentees. Again, completely free and online, accessible to everyone. And we have an in-person series, so our first in-person series in a long time with Aisha, who is from Ontario. She's making the trip down to Halifax. So she'll be talking about the possibility of equity, diversity, and inclusion on October 19th at 6 p.m. Snacks and beverages will be provided at the Canada Games Centre. And for those that can't join us in Halifax, we're going to be doing a hybrid session. So we'll do a live webinar for those that are unable to attend. Again, completely free. And just 2 more things I'd like to highlight. So we have a Kelsey Hogan from CSI Atlantic, who does research studies at Dalhousie University, is interviewing community coaches across Atlantic Canada. And by being part of this, you'll be entered into a draw for one of 3 $100 gift cards. But even if you don't win, you'll be providing so much useful knowledge to help us better support community coaches, specifically around their well-being and coping with stressors that you face as a coach. So please take part in this survey. The link is in this graphic, and it's also posted on our social media. If you can't access it, just feel free to email me and I'll send you the link. And the last one I want to highlight is another session next week about concussions. Again, a webinar online. It's posted on our social medias, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But it's put on by the province of Nova Scotia. There's a variety of professionals on this panel to discuss a conversation about concussions during National Concussion Week. And with that, I'd like to wrap up again by saying thank you to all of the coaches online and our awesome panelists for joining us. We really appreciate your insights, and we hope to see you at our future Podium Performance webinars. Thanks, everyone.